The Blitz was a bombing campaign conducted by Germany against Britain during World War II. It lasted 8 months, during which German aircraft dropped bombs on London and other cities with important industries. The campaign caused great destruction, but ultimately failed to break British morale and bring about a German victory. The Blitz was an offensive carried out by German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, during World War II, which was authorized by Adolf Hitler. It was named after the German word for lightning war. The Blitz was a series of German air attacks on British ports, airfields and radar stations, beginning in July 1940. Hitler's goal was to weaken the Royal Air Force, RAF, in preparation for an invasion of England. Despite the RAF's successful defense, the German air attacks were taking a heavy. Hitler changed his strategy from focusing on RAF sites to cities in Britain, after British retaliated to German bombings of civilian areas in London. This led to the beginning of the Blitz, with Germany launching a bombing campaign on London and other cities. The Blitz was a sustained bombing campaign conducted by Nazi Germany against London and other British cities from September 7, 1940 to May 10, 1941. It began with a 2-hour attack by 348 German bombers and 617 fighters, which dropped high explosive bombs and incendiary devices in an attempt to cause as much destruction as possible. The Blitz caused widespread damage and loss of life, but ultimately failed to break British morale. Black Saturday, the first day of the Blitz, is remembered as a devastating event in which 430 people were killed and 1,600 were injured during their several-hour aerial assault. The Battle of Britain started with German air raids during the day, but quickly changed to nighttime raids as the RAF proved too strong. The RAF was shooting down German bombers faster than they could be produced, leading the Luftwaffe to switch to night raids to avoid the deadly British fighter planes. Black Saturday marked the beginning of a 57-night bombing campaign by the Germans on London, during which over 1 million bombs were dropped. The primary target was the Docklands area of the East End, a heavily populated, impoverished area with many working-class residents living in poor housing. It was viewed as a legitimate military target by the Germans. The Blitz of London during World War II was a devastating event, leaving many civilians dead and homeless, particularly in the East End. Despite inflicting damage of Britain's war production, the raids caused immense suffering and destruction. In November 1940, the Germans expanded the Blitz to cities outside London, most notably Liverpool, Birmingham, Sheffield, Manchester, Coventry and Southampton. The attack on Coventry was the most destructive and resulted in the destruction of the old city centre and the death of more than 550 people. This event was so significant that the Germans created a new verb, to coventrate, to describe it. In 1941, the Germans launched a series of attacks against ports in England, Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland, culminating in a devastating raid on London in May, killing nearly 500 people and destroying 11,000 homes. In order to protect against unexploded bombs, the government had to set up special units to find and defuse them. These units worked around the clock to reduce the risk for unexploded bombs, but it was a slow process that could take days or weeks to complete. The British government anticipated air raids on London and other cities, predicting catastrophic casualties. As a result, they prepared on both the national and local levels, initiating a mass evacuation plan on September 1, 1939, the day the war began with Germany's invasion of Poland. Operation Pied Paper was a massive evacuation of 1.5 million people in Britain over the course of 3 days. It was the largest internal migration in British history and involved schoolchildren, women with young children, elderly, and ill people being moved from cities and towns to rural areas believed to be safe. The Blitz was a period of intense bombing raids by German forces during World War II. The British government enforced a blackout to deceive bombers by turning off streetlights, car headlights, and illuminated signs. People also hung blackout curtains in their windows to prevent any light from showing outside. Air raid sirens were also set off to warn of upcoming raids. The British air defences were inadequate at the start of the Blitz, but they improved over time. They increased the number of anti-aircraft guns and searchlights, and implemented radar-controlled guns for better accuracy. Barrage balloons were also installed in key areas to provide further protection. Barrage balloons were used as a defensive measure against low-flying planes during World War II. They were anchored to the ground with steel cables and created a physical barrier that caused planes to fly higher, making their bombing runs less accurate. The cables were strong enough to destroy any aircraft that came into contact with them. During World War II, the British government provided funds and resources to local governments to build public air raid shelters and issued more than 2 million Anderson shelters to households. These Anderson shelters were made of corrugated steel and designed to be placed in a garden and covered with dirt for protection from bombs. The Morrison shelter was a type of shelter that people could set up inside their homes during World War II. It was an iron cage that could be used as a refuge in the event that the house started to collapse. During World War II, the Blitz was a series of bombings that caused a lot of destruction. The government was not ready for it, so the shelters they built were not strong enough to keep people safe. There were not enough shelters either, so some people couldn't find a place to hide. A tragic incident in the East End during the beginning of the Blitz sparked public outrage over government shelter policy. People were instructed to go to South Hallsville School for shelter, with the promise that they would be moved to a safer area soon. The evacuation was delayed, possibly due to buses being sent to the wrong location. On September 10, 1940, a German bomb flattened a school, with an estimated death toll of 600 men, women and children. Although the government initially reported 77 deaths, it is believed that the death toll was covered up due to concerns about public morale. The South Hallsville School disaster in London sparked a movement of EastEnders to seek shelter on their own, resulting in the occupation of the Savoy Hotel shelter. Despite government orders, many also chose to take refuge in the city's underground tube station. The underground communities in London during World War II provided a safe haven for thousands of people who were fleeing bombings and destructions. Initially, many people resorted to sleeping on the tube platforms, but the government eventually provided bunk beds and bathrooms for them. This allowed those in need to stay safe and warm and ultimately saved lives. Mickey Davies led an effort in the East End of London to create a shelter in response to dissatisfaction with public shelters. This shelter, known as Mickey's Shelter, was a network of underground tunnels that housed up to 5,000 people, though it was overcrowded, dirty and dark. People were forced to sleep on bags of trash. Mickey Davies, a British businessman, provided leadership and guidance to the people of a shelter in London during the Blitz of World War II. He organized a committee to establish rules, set up medical stations staffed by off-duty medical personnel, and persuaded the government to improve existing shelters and create new ones. His efforts helped ensure the safety of the people of the shelter and helped inspire the government to provide better protection for its citizens. The Blitz was a devastating 8-month period of bombing raids on London and other cities in the UK during World War II. It resulted in the deaths of 43,000 civilians and left 1 in 6 Londoners homeless. Despite the severe damage it inflicted, it ultimately proved to be a mistake by the Germans, as it failed to break the spirit of the British people. The Battle of Britain was an air offensive led by Germany against England in 1940. Despite the intensity of the attacks, the RAF was able to repel them, and the invasion was postponed indefinitely. In May 1941, Hitler called off the Blitz as he shifted his forces eastward to attack the Soviet Union. The Blitz was an attempt by Hitler to break the morale of the British people, but they remained determined and resilient, exemplified by the phrase "business as usual," written on shop windows. Despite the death and devastation, there were a few calls for surrender.